Hi there. It's December 10th, and today we are looking at a whole book in the Hebrew Scriptures. This is one of the 12 minor prophets that begins with Hosea and ends with Malachi. And today we're looking at the book of the prophet Joel, Yoel, and his name means the Lord is God. And Joel is really opens up with the picture of a swarm of locusts coming, a plague of locusts. Locusts were creatures that were devastating, that sweep through whole nations and cause destruction, eating up the crops. And particularly here, this swarm of locusts that's coming are going to destroy vines, Joel says. And remember that vines are a picture of Israel for the Lord, and the Lord speaks of Israel as a vine. So there's also a double meaning here, that there's this plague of locusts coming, but there's also the threat of the nations that surround Judah and Jerusalem, who are seeking to attack her and to decimate her. And so Joel describes the stages of the locust's existence, the hopping and the cutting and the swarming locust, and they are gradually growing, and once they're growing they're unstoppable. And so Joel describes this terrible army that is coming against the people that are going to lay waste to everything. In chapter 2, this terrible attack of locusts comes, and there's a sounding of an alarm. There's a sounding of a trumpet telling people to get ready to stand against this. It describes the noise, the terrible humming, the swarming of the locusts as they crawl over everything, as they get into everything. And so the answer is, the prophet says, to turn to the Lord, to come back to him, to pray, to fast. In fact, the Lord says, rend your hearts and not your garments. Rending garments, rending clothes was a sign of mourning and a sign of distress in ancient Israel. But the Lord is saying, don't just do the outer thing, do the inner thing. Let your hearts be changed and turned. Because, says Joel, the Lord is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, rich in covenant grace. And so he says, come together. Come into an assembly and call on the Lord, and there will be restoration, because whoever calls on the Lord will be delivered, he says. And then at the end of chapter 2, there's this amazing passage. I say chapter because in the Hebrew it's a separate chapter, this end of chapter 2. And it says that in these days, in those last days, in the latter days, he will pour out his Spirit on all flesh. This is that great promise which is echoed back at the day of Pentecost, when Peter stands up, when the Holy Spirit is poured out, and Peter quotes from this passage in Joel 2, about this outpouring of the Holy Spirit that's coming. It says the Spirit will be poured out. Old men will see visions, old men will dream dreams, young men will see visions. Men and women will experience this encounter with the Lord, and there will be amazing things happening, signs in the sky on the day of the Lord. There's a lot of emphasis on this phrase, the day of the Lord. But it's an amazing promise, which, as I say, Peter refers to on the day of Pentecost, when they see the Holy Spirit come upon people after the death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus. And so this is looking forward to what is coming. God is going to fill his people with himself. And then in chapter 3, this is also linked to a retribution which is going to come upon the nations who have oppressed Judah and who have oppressed Jerusalem. And those who have made captives of Israel, they will have this captivity returned on themselves. They will have retribution returned on themselves. These Gentiles who have been warring against Judah. And in the last chapter, Joel foresees a great battle, a great coming together of nations, and he calls on the people to respond, to stand up. He says at one point, beat your plowshares into swords. That's a strange picture, because elsewhere it says beat your swords into plowshares. But here God is saying prepare for war for his people, but God is going to deliver them. God is going to be the one who defeats these armies that are gathering together in what's called the Valley of Decision. Multitudes and multitudes in the Valley of Decision, the old version says. And there's going to be something decisive happening when the Lord steps in and the Lord rescues his people, because the Lord is the hope of Zion. The Lord is the hope of his people, and there will be restoration. The nations will be confounded, but Zion will be restored. This is an amazing book. It's an amazing short prophecy, which it basically establishes the fact that the Lord is the deliverer of his people. He is the one to whom, if they cry to him, he will deliver them. If they cry to him, he will rescue them. Not only that, but the promise is that he will pour out his Spirit on all flesh, that all men will dream dreams, young men will see visions, men servants, maid servants will prophesy. This is that which is fulfilled, in which we are living in that day. We are living in that time when the Spirit of God is still being poured out. The Spirit of God is still being seen in these days. Let's rejoice in that. Let's enjoy that constant visitation of the Holy Spirit upon us today. Have a very good December 10th.